For people that don't know what it's really like inside of a bank, not to mention a high power, aggressive, and very well respected bank like Goldman Sachs, what is it like? How could you describe that to people? I mean, I could try, but I'm really curious what you would say. I mean, what is the mentality? What is it not?
Right.
There's also a lot of people familiar with the show Billions, right? Which is about hedge fund managers. But back in the 90s, those guys were at banks like Goldman, right?
Yeah,
they were in proprietary trading desks.
Yeah.
So the mentality was similar. There's actually a plot line in Billions where the guy's trading on the back of the 9/11, stocks and things. But how would you describe that to people?
Yeah, first of all, that's a fantastic show.
Why do you like it?
I love the writing on that show, and I actually like, one of the things I really like on the show is that there's a lot of conflict within the lead characters, even the ones that are making tons of money in their personal lives or alongside what they're doing in their professional lives. That's actually shown in that show. Like, it's not like they're 100% about making the money. I mean, they are, and it's a game, and it's a win or lose thing, and there's a constant nature of that behind the scenes. And even with the DA character, it's like there's a lot of like winning and losing. It's very much binary, but yet there's a lot of gray. There's conflicts in personal life and everything else, and so
I'd say it's very accurate, a lot of those things. I know a lot of guys in hedge funds, and like you said, from the dress to the personal lives to the houses to everything, it's a decent, reasonably accurate look.
To the extent actually where I never wanted to see that show, because I was like, I've lived that show. Like, I never even wanted to watch the show, and then I kind of watched the first episode probably on a plane. Actually, I think a plane coming here at one point, and I just was like hooked on it, and so now I'm caught up on the seasons.
Yeah, I was the same way. I didn't want to watch it. I was like,
I've done that.
And then I watched the first episode, and I was waiting for all the stereotypes and stuff, and there was a few in there. But then when I looked it deeper, I was like, this is kind of real, like what goes through a trader's mind, what their life is like, what it's not like, how it's not all glamorous, how the money doesn't fix everything,
Yeah.
It's interesting to watch.
It's interesting. And actually, as that show goes on, just to finish up on that show, is there's a character that comes on, like a younger character, who uses multiple pronouns. So basically, is considered a they and a them in terms of like just having sort of multiple sexualities inside. And but one of the things that they do in the show is they evolve in their career with respect to the hedge fund and with respect to making money and choosing the right trades and everything else. But they also kind of maintain, we'll see how the show progresses in the next season, that sense of just doing the right thing while still trying to play the game right.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting, because I think for me, on Wall Street, there, especially working at a Goldman Sachs from Bear Stearns, it was quite a transition, because when I interviewed for Goldman, which was in New York, and I'd been in London working for Bear Stearns, I remember at the time that I was considering kind of ending banking anyway. I was already, there's a lot of stuff going on in the 90s. There was, for example, a Jubilee 2000. Which was about canceling the debt for poorer countries, major event that happened in Birmingham, UK at the time that I went to while I was still working at Bear. So I was in this sort of covert, like I want the debt to be canceled for the people on the ground. On the other hand, I'm in these institutions, and we're trading around it, and it was just a weird sort of thing in me personally. I was straddling both worlds. But then when I did interview with Goldman, there was a sense at the time for me that, if you're gonna stay in banking, and I'd been at a number of different firms at this point, then Goldman was kind of like the epitome of banking. Like, if you're going to be in it, don't be in it to go to Merrill Lynch. Be in it to go to Goldman. And that was kind of also happening when I moved there. But I interviewed in New York, and they also sent people out to interview me in London, because they
have a long interview process, don't they?
And it was 9 months.
Wow.
That's exactly right. It was 9 months of an interview process. And I interviewed everyone throughout, the top of the firm. And it was really interesting, because I remember there was one moment I was in New York. I was still in the midst of this 9-month interviewing process. And I was on one of the trading floors at the Goldman headquarters on 85 Broad Street, where I was that day also of the 9/11 attacks. And Lloyd Blankfein, who was running the division at the time that I wound up working for and ultimately became the CEO, of Goldman Sachs, took me onto the floor, like physically walked me onto his trading floor, and said, take a look, like it was this like grand, gesture as to like this like promised land of banking or whatever it was. Take a look. I was like, I'm looking, and he's like, this is not Bear Stearns. Yeah, just so we're clear. Like, it was almost like a look. If you're going to be with us, it's totally different. And it was very sort of physical presentation of how Goldman was, and that was really the mentality of Goldman. That they had what they called a culture of excellence. I mean, that's how they defined it. And you were very much a part of it, or you weren't at the firm. I mean, it was very simple. And if you're going to be at the firm, you were part of that culture, and you were called a culture carrier. And in reviews that were done of your performance throughout the years, carrying that culture was a component of the reviews themselves. And that culture was ultimately a very aggressive banking culture. That's what it was. But they sort of wrapped it in this notion of being perfect, or being as close to perfect as you could get in banking.
And how would that manifest itself? As in long hours, we expect presentations to be on point, everything you do is just excellent?
Well, yes. I mean, there's definitely long hours. I mean, your life was Goldman Sachs. I mean, that was pretty much how it presented itself. If there was a need to, and my boss would do this, have a call or call someone at like 1 a.m. in the morning because they needed something in Tokyo or whatever. You were just available. That was kind of the idea. That is kind of what you signed up for. And if there were offsites, or if there were activities that Goldman wanted to do outside of the actual building, or working hours or traveling hours, and you just did them. I mean, it was just part of how it was.
So if there's a weekend offsite, you were there.
You were at everything, and you were pretty much living and breathing Goldman at all times.
Right, which made it excellent.
To them, it made it excellent.
And how was it for you?
So I had some real issues with how that was manifesting even before 9/11, because around that time there was a lot of corporate fraud that was becoming apparent. Some really big name frauds like Enron and WorldCom that was coming apparent throughout not just Wall Street but the world. Like the news was starting to focus on companies that were creating sort of financial versions of themselves in tangent with the major banks to hide money, to sort of like misrepresent their balance sheet, mislead their investors, and so all of that was happening as well. And so I was working at Goldman, for example, when Enron was a client of Goldman. They were actually competitors as well, because they were both involved in trading energy options and futures and everything else. And here I was sort of developing models for Goldman to look at trading strategies, and seeing them go up on Enron's website, but also knowing that we were both working with Enron and competing with Enron, and this was just one of many names like that. And it just seemed very wrong. And also one of the things I had always done throughout my career on Wall Street, particularly when I was in London in the 90s, when we were talking about, the EU was about to happen. There's a lot of countries that were changing how their economies were viewed, and how their debt loads were viewed and stuff, and just the real world, is analyzing what the downside of investing in certain ways could be. I was very big on the downside.
Right, which is kind of why you had this 25-cent trading strategy. Right. Even that's probably why you left Goldman on 9/11, because you're thinking, sure, I could stay on the fourth floor and make a bunch of money trading energy, but the downside is I can die. So you're always looking to limit.
Or I can lose my soul, right?
Right,
I mean,
lose your soul.
There's a downside of that as well. And so, and even when I was developing those models in London for Bear, the downside meant that there could be an event that happens in Croatia or in Venezuela or wherever, and that could create a whole spiral of other events that could be negative for a particular situation or particular trade or whatever. And so I was always quantifying the possibility of those downsides and what they would look like in mathy terms, wonkily, for a particular strategy. And so at Goldman, it was becoming harder for me to get internal funding, attention, green light, to creating systems and working with, finding the people internally who I could gather, who worked with me to work on the systems that quantified that downside. It was all about showing the upside in particular strategies. And we did some big strategies from some very big corporations and institutions. And I felt like I wasn't able to get traction for internal attention to the downside. And that just really bothered me. And I remember having a conversation with one of the senior partners who had been on the hiring 9-month committee, or a series of people for me in the interview process, and saying, you know, what is it? Like, this is like, shouldn't we want to tell our clients this? I mean, shouldn't we, for the long term, want to be able to say that, look, you can do this and you can make all this money, but if this happens, then you're going to lose money. That's just the way it is. And he took me aside and he said, you know what? Your clients are senior management. Like, when you talk about clients, they're not the firm's clients. They're managing up. You know, if you want to do well here, if you want to survive here, if you want to make money, you manage up. Those are your clients. And I didn't really like that either.
Right. And they want you to make as much money as possible.
They want you to make as much money as possible, not worry about, you know, funding analysis for the downside or whatever it might be that could take away from that positive narrative.
Okay, gotcha.
I think that we're starting the beginning of a prolonged period now of a recession or even worse.
Hi, it's Brian Rose from London Real. I recently sat down with Nomi Prins, the former Wall Street trader you would have seen on Fox, CNBC, and Bloomberg Television. She regularly advises the Federal Reserve, IMF, and World Bank on important financial policy matters.
I've realized over the years that people don't have the same exposure to trading systems on Wall Street. And so I looked at what are some of the ways that I can create something that regular people on the ground can use to access some of what Wall Street does all the time.
We had an incredible conversation, but what really stood out to me is her brand new 25-cent contract strategy, designed to leverage a little-known market anomaly that happens every day around 10 a.m., if you know what to look for.
The more comfortable you feel with financial elements, the better you'll be at managing them, and the more confident and empowered you'll be in your own life in any aspect of your life, not just with respect to money.
Now, as a former Wall Street trader, I am super excited to share this investment strategy for the very first time. As the host of this episode, I'm able to offer you exclusive rights to a seat at her 25-cent contract live training. But you must act now to secure your spot. So click on the link below or go to londonreal.tv/Nomi, that's N-O-M-I, to secure your spot. And I will see you there.
I myself, my graduate degrees are in statistics and operations research, undergrad in math. So that was always, yes, my kind of angle into Wall Street relative to trading or sales, which was some of the other types of jobs on Wall Street. It was always about the math, the trends, the numbers, the securities, and how they behaved under certain conditions. And that's always what I looked at throughout my entire career on Wall Street. And I always also looked at the downside, you know, not what happens if a trade works, but what happens if it doesn't work. What are the risks you should be looking for, and how can you best, you know, sort of protect that investment for those risks? And so that's a lot. They're a very cheap way of taking an investment into the market, particularly in times of volatility, that take into account what the big sharks are doing, that take into account why volatility is happening, and presents a way for a person to take advantage of that scenario in a cheap way, and in a fast way, and in an easy way.